7 years ago, in 2004, Mel Gibson released a movie called Passion of the Christ, which depicted the final 12 hours of Jesus' life as told by the Synoptic Gospels. The film, which grossed $600 million to become the biggest non-English language film ever proceeds-wise, was heavily criticized by some viewers for being anti-Semitic. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops joined the Anti-Defamation League in calling the script one of the most troubling texts relative to anti-Semitic potential that any of us had seen in years, noting that the plot portrays Jesus as having been relentlessly pursued by an evil cabal of Jews. Leon Wieseltier of the New Republic said, "In its representation of its Jewish characters, The Passion of the Christ is without any doubt an anti-Semitic movie, and anybody who says otherwise knows nothing or chooses to know nothing about the visual history of anti-Semitism in art and film." Now, 7 years later, following a tragic shooting in Tucson that left 6 people dead and 14 wounded, including a Jewish congresswoman fighting for her life, Sarah Palin has accused her own critics of enacting a blood libel against her, specifically against her, to stoke more general political fires burning across the country. Let's be clear. No one is undertaking a blood libel against Sarah Palin, the Tea Party, or any of their champions. While the term has been used by current writers to dramatize modern-day persecutions, its origins carry a far more sinister meaning. Like similar claims of well poisoning and host desecration, the accusation of a blood libel asserts that Jews target Christians in an extension of the crucifixion of Christ. In the case of a blood libel, Jews are said to murder children, especially Christian children, in order to use their blood in the baking of matzos, or unleavened bread, during Passover. Professor Jacob Yuval of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem argued in 1993 that this pernicious myth may stem from 12th century Christian descriptions of Jewish actions during the First Crusade, when some Jews opted for death over forced conversion. Crusaders, Yuval contends, reckoned that if Jews could kill their own children, there was nothing to stop them from suffering the same fate upon Christian children in Europe. Whatever the starting point for the fantasy, its repeated deployment in the 20th century is incontrovertible. 1903 saw the Kishinev pogrom, an anti-Jewish revolt that began when an anti-Semitic newspaper wrote that a young Christian boy was found murdered in the town of Dobasari, so that his blood could be used to bake matzah. 49 Jews were killed, hundreds more were wounded. In 1928, the Jews of Massena, New York were falsely accused of the ritual slaying of a Christian girl shortly before Yom Kippur. In 1946, in Kielce, Poland, a year after the end of the Holocaust, false allegations of blood libel led to mob attacks against Jews and the deaths of approximately 40 people. Even as late as 2005, the disappearance of 5 Russian boys led some to claim that a secret Hasidic sect facilitated the ceremonial murder of children, leading to demands that synagogues, bakeries, restaurants, and Jewish businesses be investigated and in some cases shut down entirely. That Sarah Palin is unaware of this history is disturbing but not surprising. Too often in modern times, we take a reductionist view of history, essentializing it to its barest, most soundbite-ready bones. What is surprising, however, is that Palin, or anyone, would use such a term in the midst of a national tragedy. Journalists, editorialists, commentators, pundits, and even bloggers have rightly condemned Palin's historical vapidity and narcissistic usurpation of the spotlight shined yesterday on the victims of the Tucson tragedy by President Obama's speech at the University of Arizona. Too frequently absent from these remarks, however, is a clear delineation and rejection of Sarah Palin's actual violence, not the violence symbolized by her infamous crosshairs map, but the violence espoused in her tautological appropriation of an incendiary phrase to paradoxically bemoan violence itself. The continental philosopher Slavoj Žižek, whom some have hailed as the foremost public intellectual in the Western world, defines two types of violence: subjective and objective. Subjective violence, he says, is overt, visible, committed by easily identifiable culprits. To this category belongs the fateful actions of Jared Lee Loughner, the alleged gunman behind the attacks. Objective violence, on the other hand, involves less putatively active mechanisms of coercion that, nonetheless, buttress relations of dominance and exploitation, reify power relations through rigidly articulated rhetorical codes, and attempt to preempt dissent through a subsumption of cultural difference and economic dislocation into the structures of social democracy. Sarah Palin's insipid comments jump without hesitation into this latter category. I do not blame Sarah Palin alone for the tragedy in Tucson. I do wholeheartedly blame her for not taking the opportunity with which she was presented to make an effort to staunch our nation's wounds, just as Daniel Hernandez staunched the wounds of Gabby Giffords, ultimately saving her life. In her callous, clumsy statement, Palin has shown that she has no interest in preserving the life of the country whose values she purports to extol. She is interested only in the demise of all that fails to enrich her poll showings or personal bank account. She has, in her own words, taken up arms against the very civility President Obama beseeched us to strive toward. She has rendered incredible any future plea she might make for a pacific, honest, open-minded discourse and debate. To borrow from her hero, Ronald Reagan, she has feasted upon the sorrow of a nation, while those who left us last Saturday ascend through the gates of heaven to touch the face of God.